The therapist. No one understands what I saw, not a goddamn person. Mark looked up at his therapist, who was writing something on a notepad. Mark, can you explain the person you saw again? Replied the therapist, who stopped writing in the book and was looking at Mark. I told you, it ain't a person. Mark took a long pause before talking again. That thing took my daughter, my wife and my sister's dog, said Mark in a gloomy tone. The therapist began writing in her pad again while she responded. And what did this thing look like? About 7 foot tall, big yellow teeth, an enormous grin with black flesh and a hungry look in its dead eyes. The therapist stopped all of a sudden and said, so what did it do to your family, if you don't mind me asking? Mark looked up at her with tears in his eyes and said, ripped them apart, dug into their bones and pulled out chunks of flesh. The therapist was slightly taken aback by this statement. And why didn't this thing attack you? Responded the therapist in a slightly worried voice. Mark took a deep breath and said, it looked me straight in my eyes and said, we are the same. It then darted out the door into the dark night. I don't know what it means by that, but it probably isn't something good. Mark then stared at the ground with tears in his eyes, trying to hold back from having a breakdown right there on the floor. He then started again. You believe me, don't you? Mark stared up at his therapist with hopeful eyes. The therapist thought for a while before responding with, I think that's enough for today. Why don't you go back to your room and we'll pick up where we left off? But you believe me, don't you? Mark asked. I'm not crazy. You know that. The therapist responded with, we can talk about it tomorrow. I think you need some rest now. In reality, she didn't have the heart to tell Mark he was acting insane. Reluctantly, Mark stood up and walked out the door, where he was escorted by 3 armed guards to the door of his cell. The therapist stood up also. Taking her notepad with her, she walked down the hall to her boss, who was standing in front of Mark's cell looking in through the one-way glass window. How's he doing? The boss asked when he saw her approach. Not very good. He's still convinced that a strange black creature killed his family. The boss looked back at Mark, who was sitting on his bed with his head in his hands. Poor soul, he responded with. Doesn't know it was him. The therapist spoke again. How does the police know it was him that done it? She said in a questioning voice. The boss replied quickly with, they got a call about a domestic violence issue from the neighbors. Apparently they heard screaming and smashing coming from Mark's apartment. When the police got there, the kid was dead with 14 stab wounds in her stomach, and the dog was lying on the ground with its neck slashed open. They found him on top of his wife, stabbing her repeatedly in the neck. Took 4 guys to get him off her. In Mark's cell, he was sitting on his bed thinking about what that thing was that had killed his family, when a sudden weight pushed the bed down slightly, like someone had joined him on the bed and sat down next to him. Mark looked beside him on his bed, and the thing was sitting there, with a big grin on his face. What's he looking at? Asked the therapist after seeing Mark look to his side all of a sudden. Don't know, replied the boss. Maybe he's having another episode, he said again, looking at Mark, who had a very disturbed expression. You done a great job, said the thing in a raspy voice. How would you like to do another job for me? It involves getting rid of more people. Mark stopped crying. Looking up at the thing, he was no longer scared. He stared at the thing for a while, and eventually a small smile began to form on his lips. Then he started to laugh, a small snicker at first, but it then became a loud, wheezing laugh. It was so loud it sounded like he had heard the funniest joke in the world, except the laugh was void of any humor. The thing began to laugh as well, until they were both laughing hysterically. For the first time in Mark's life, he had found a true friend. A trip from Stockholm to hell. I always perceived my childhood house as a warm and friendly home. Like every family, we had our issues sometimes, but altogether we were incredibly lucky, and photos on our walls were there to prove it. Like the one of my sister Ashley and I on the day of my high school graduation last year. She looked even prouder than I did in the photo. My parents and the 2 of us at the beach on a windy day. Ashley with a bright smile on her face, and me looking grumpy as usual with my hair going in all directions. My favorite photo, however, was the one of Ashley and I when she was 4 and I was 6, and we were sitting on the swing set in the garden. Back then we almost looked like twins. The same blonde hair, The same freckled face, except she was the happy one and I was the serious one. Now that we're older, we've started to find our own looks, but at least the freckled faces are still slightly the same. I decided to take a gap year before college and was still living at home with my parents and sister when strange and painful things started happening to all of us. A few weeks prior, my mother's birthday was coming up and Ash had the brilliant idea of replicating the photo of us on the swing set. We'd put on the same red sweaters and I even straightened my hair so it would look a little more like hers. The swing set now was old and rusty, but Ashley thought it made it even more artistic, or emphasizing the passing of time or whatever. I swear it's gone. It used to be right here, my sister called from the living room. It's on the shelf, I shouted back. Ashley came to the door of the garden where I was sitting on the swing. I remembered the photo pretty well, but we wanted it to look as similar as possible. Mel, it's not there. You can check if you don't believe me. I followed her to the living room and she was right. The photo was nowhere to be found. Okay, whatever, we'll just ask Dad. Maybe he knows. Dad? Ashley shouted. He's not home. Let's just take the photo tomorrow. It's getting dark anyway, I said. Huh, I thought I heard the door earlier. That was the first photo that disappeared. At first we thought my parents moved them, but they had no clue either where the photo was. My mom said something about probably moving it during cleaning, but that was only the start. In my room I had a wall with Polaroids all assembled perfectly symmetrical. That's why I noticed right away that one of them was suddenly gone. A photo of Ashley on Halloween with Cheshire Cat makeup on her face. She swore she hadn't touched it. Yeah, Mel, I wanted to hang up a single photo of myself in my room. That's how self-absorbed I am, she joked. Nobody took the vanishing photos seriously except me until it was impossible not to notice anymore. Pictures were disappearing from our home. Sometimes empty frames were left. What got us really worried, however, was when we realized that all the photos that vanished were the ones with either just Ashley on them or the two of us together. And then we noticed the photo of our family at the beach. The part with Ashley on it had been cut off and the rest had been put back into the frame. That's when we knew for a fact that somebody had been inside our home. My parents called the police, but they couldn't do much more except tell us to exchange the locks and get a decent security system. My parents were completely freaked out and made sure that our home was as safe as possible. My mom didn't want either Ashley or I to go outside alone anymore, especially during night. Ashley didn't have her license yet, so either my parents or I would pick her up from anywhere she went, which she didn't like much considering she was 17. She thought we were overreacting. With all these security measures we thought we were safe. We couldn't have predicted that it would happen like this. In our quiet and secure neighborhood, nobody understood how she could have been abducted in the middle of the day. She was supposed to be at football practice in a big group of people. She had practice right after school on the same property. We had been careful, but it was as if she had just disappeared out of nowhere without anyone noticing. We put up posters all over town with her face on it. We put it on social media, asked neighbors to help. We checked the security cameras. There was no sign, no clue, nothing. My sister had vanished just as the photographs of her. Everyone was shocked that something like that could have happened. I don't even know how to describe what kind of emotions I was going through. My sister was the most important person in my life. She was my best friend. The anger, fear and guilt were eating me up alive. I spent every day looking for my little sister, and the devastating thought that I might never see her again broke my heart into pieces. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. Without a single sign of Ashley, people almost started to give up, but then all of a sudden more people started disappearing. The teenage boy that lived down the street apparently disappeared from his own backyard. An elderly lady that worked in the library vanished on her way to work. A cashier from the supermarket down the road went to the parking lot after work but never got to her car. There was no common factor in the victims, no apparent motive. It seemed completely random. The only thing all the cases had in common was that all of them had photos of them stolen beforehand, even though it was less obvious for the other ones compared to Ashley. A photo of the lady had been cut out of a town magazine in the library. An Employee of the Month photo of the girl from the supermarket had apparently been stolen, but nobody noticed it. A photo of the boys' swim team had disappeared from a display in his school. It was far more subtle than in the case of Ashley, which made the people not realize it soon, but eventually everyone in town became extremely scared and paranoid. when I saw the girl with dark patches under her eyes, her hair patchy and her skin reduced to a skeleton walk into our home that had turned sad and cold in the last months. I couldn't believe my eyes. At first I wasn't even sure if it was her, but then she smiled just enough for me to be sure that I was indeed looking at the face of my little sister. I broke down on the spot, tears of relief and bitterness running down my cheeks. I had never lost hope that I would meet her again, but seeing my beautiful sister as broken down as this was like a stab in my heart. The following days were hard on all of us. While we needed to focus on Ashley's needs the most, now we also knew that there was still someone dangerous out there and that were people who needed to be rescued. I don't know where they are. He blindfolded us the entire time. I never even saw their faces, but I know they are fine. He didn't treat us badly. That was everything she told the police or my parents. I was furious with my sister. I was beyond the moon that I had her back, but this shell of a person was nothing like my sister. She seemed cold-hearted, distracted, weird. I know this sounds awful. She went through something horrific after all, but I simply couldn't understand how she wouldn't at least try to help and save those other people. But as it turned out, she didn't need to. One by one they came back, all looking as terrible as Ashley, but still none of them gave any information on what had happened. The following days were even weirder. Ashley didn't talk to us anymore. She would lock herself up in her room. When she came outside, she was wrapped in layers of clothes and blankets. When we asked to get her to the doctor, she refused and started shouting, even though she was getting sick all the time. When I heard her throwing up and crying in the middle of the night in our shared bathroom, I was done with giving her space. Ash, I know what you went through was terrible and I'm so sorry about it. You didn't deserve this. This fucking monster needs to suffer. I took a deep breath, and I can't even imagine what you went through. It breaks my heart to know that you were in that hell, blindfolded and afraid. But you are home now. You are safe. You can talk to me. Ashley looked up at me with a face of disgust I had never seen on her before. You don't fucking get it, Mel. I was safe and happy when I was there with him. This right here is hell.